Retirement was supposed to be simple. Sell the house, cash out the superannuation, find a quiet place where your money goes further and nobody asks what you used to do for a living. I thought I was buying peace. She thought I was buying her future. The thing about financial scams is, they don't just take your money. They take your faith in your own judgment. And when you're 63 and starting over, that's the one thing you can't afford to lose. If our stories resonate with you, don't forget to like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. This story was shared with us by one of our longtime viewers. He asked us not to share his name, but he wanted his experience heard. I never imagined I'd be telling this story. My name is Clarence, and at 63, I thought I had life figured out. 30 years of marriage had ended in a divorce that drained half my savings in legal fees. The house in Nowra sold for enough to give me a fresh start, but not enough to retire comfortably in Australia. That's when I started researching Southeast Asia. The Philippines kept coming up in expat forums, low cost of living, English-speaking population, friendly locals who welcomed foreigners. I wasn't looking for adventure. I was looking for a place where my remaining money would last. I liquidated everything. Superannuation, investment accounts, even the old Holden I'd been driving for 15 years. When the dust settled, I had $180,000. Not a fortune, but enough to live modestly for the rest of my life if I was careful. I spent months researching visa requirements, healthcare options, and safe neighborhoods. Lipa City in Batangas province seemed perfect, close enough to Manila for conveniences, far enough away to avoid the chaos and expense of the capital. The research felt good. It gave me purpose during those long months after the divorce papers were signed. My ex-wife got the house we'd built together, and I got the debt from trying to keep it. But I wasn't bitter. At 63, you learn that holding on to anger only hurts yourself. I was ready for something new, something simple, a small apartment, maybe near a beach. Time to read books I'd never had time for. Maybe learn a new language. The idea of starting over in a place where nobody knew about my failed marriage or the business I'd lost 5 years earlier felt like freedom. The flight to Manila was my first time leaving Australia in over a decade. I remember sitting in that cramped economy seat, looking down at the lights of the city as we descended, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But when I stepped off the plane and felt that warm, humid air hit my face, something inside me relaxed for the first time in years. This was going to work. It had to work. The bus ride to Lipa City took 3 hours through countryside that looked nothing like the Australian outback I'd grown up with. Everything was green and alive. Even in the dry season, rice paddies stretched to the horizon, broken up by small villages where children waved at passing vehicles. I'd rented a small furnished apartment site unseen, trusting the photos on the rental website. When the tricycle dropped me off at the address, I wasn't disappointed. 2 bedrooms, basic furniture, air conditioning that actually worked. The rent was 8,000 pesos a month, less than 200 Australian dollars. I could afford this for decades if I needed to. The first few weeks were exactly what I'd hoped for. I established routines. Morning coffee at a small cafe near my apartment, where the owner spoke excellent English and made me feel welcome. Afternoon walks through the city center, getting familiar with the banks, the grocery stores, the pharmacy. Evening meals at different local restaurants, slowly expanding my comfort zone with Filipino cuisine. I wasn't trying to become a local, just trying to fit in quietly. The other foreigners I met were mostly retirees like me, though some were younger men who'd married Filipino women and settled down to raise families. It was at the coffee shop that I first met Carina. She was working behind the counter, part-time while she finished her business degree at the local university. 22 years old, with an easy smile and curiosity about the world beyond Lipa City. She'd practice her English with me during quiet periods, asking about Australia, about what it was like to live so far from family. I enjoyed the conversations. It felt good to have someone interested in my stories, someone who didn't know about my failures back home. "You came here all alone?" she asked one morning, refilling my coffee without being asked. "That's very brave. Most foreign men who come here, they come with wives or girlfriends already. I laughed. Not brave, just tired of complications. Sometimes starting over means starting alone. She nodded like she understood, but I could see in her eyes that she was thinking about something else. My professor says Australia has very good business opportunities. Very stable economy. I would like to visit someday, maybe for graduate studies. That conversation stayed with me. There was something refreshing about talking to someone who saw possibility in the future instead of dwelling on past mistakes. Carina wasn't like the other young women I'd encountered in the expat community. She wasn't looking for a ticket out of the Philippines through marriage to a foreigner. She had plans, ambitions, a sense of purpose I envied. Over the following weeks, our conversations grew longer and more personal. She told me about her family parents who ran a small farm outside the city, younger siblings she was helping put through school. The financial pressure was enormous. Her business degree had taken 6 years to complete because she could only afford to take a few classes each semester while working to support herself and contribute to the family income. Education is the only way out of poverty here, she explained one afternoon when the cafe was empty except for us. My parents never went to high school, but they sacrifice everything so we can have better opportunities. Sometimes I feel guilty for wanting more when they have so little. I found myself looking forward to these conversations more than I wanted to admit. Carina was intelligent, thoughtful, and unlike anyone I'd spent time with in years. She'd show me her textbooks, explain the concepts she was learning about microfinance and small business development. Her thesis was on how foreign investment could help local entrepreneurs create sustainable businesses that benefited entire communities. It was impressive work, far more sophisticated than anything I'd expected from a small city university. The problem is always capital, she explained, showing me graphs and charts she'd created for her research. People here have good ideas, strong work ethic, but no access to startup funding. The banks want collateral that poor families don't have, so good businesses never get started, and poverty continues. I began to see her differently, not as a young woman serving coffee, but as someone with real potential being held back by circumstances beyond her control. When she mentioned struggling to pay for her final semester, I offered to help without thinking twice about it. $800 nothing to me, but enough to change her entire future. I cannot accept this, she said, shaking her head. You are very kind, but I cannot take money from you. It's not charity, I told her. Consider it an investment in someone I believe in. You can pay me back when you're running your own successful business. The tears in her eyes told me I'd said exactly the right thing. This wasn't about dependence or obligation. It was about recognizing potential and helping someone achieve their dreams. Something I'd never been able to do for my own children, who'd grown up resenting me for working too much and being emotionally unavailable. Maybe I couldn't fix my relationship with them, but I could help someone else avoid the limitations that poverty imposed. Carina graduated summa cum laude 6 months later. I attended the ceremony, sitting with her family in the stifling heat of the university gymnasium, feeling proud in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Her parents thanked me repeatedly in broken English, and I could see where she got her determination and warmth. These were good people who'd worked hard their entire lives and deserved better than the hand they'd been dealt. 2 weeks after graduation, Carina asked to meet me at the cafe after hours. She arrived with a folder thick with documents and a laptop computer that looked like it had seen better days. I have something to show you, she said, her eyes bright with excitement. A business proposal. The presentation was impressive. She'd identified a gap in the local market for internet services and computer training. Most of the internet cafes in Lipa City were outdated, with slow connections and old equipment. Young people needed better access to technology for their education, and small businesses needed reliable internet and printing services. She'd researched the competition, identified the perfect location, and calculated startup costs down to the peso. The total investment needed is $15,000, she explained, clicking through slides that showed projected revenues, customer demographics, and expansion possibilities. With good equipment and reliable internet, we could be profitable within 6 months. But more importantly, We would be providing a real service to the community. I was impressed by the thoroughness of her research, but what struck me most was how she kept saying, "we." This wasn't a request for funding, it was an invitation to partnership. She wanted me as a business partner, not just an investor. After months of feeling useless and disconnected, the idea of having a purpose again was intoxicating. "What would my role be?" I asked. "Equal partners," she said without hesitation. "You provide the capital, I provide the local knowledge and daily management. We make decisions together, split profits 50-50. You would have real involvement in something meaningful, not just collecting passive income." That night, I lay awake thinking about the proposal. $15,000 was less than 10% of my retirement savings, but it wasn't really about the money. It was about being needed again, being part of something that mattered. The next morning, I told Carina I was in. The excitement in her voice when I agreed to fund the business was infectious. "You will not regret this decision," she promised. "We are going to build something special together." Within a week, she'd shown me the lease agreement for a small shop space in a busy part of the city center. The location was perfect near the university, with foot traffic from students and professionals. She introduced me to the supplier who would provide computers, printers, and networking equipment. Everything seemed legitimate and well-planned. I transferred the money to her account, trusting that her local knowledge would navigate any bureaucratic complications I might face as a foreigner. The next month was the most energized I'd felt in years. We spent long days setting up the shop, configuring computers, arranging furniture, and planning the layout for maximum efficiency. Carina handled the technical aspects while I focused on the business systems, inventory tracking, customer service protocols, basic accounting procedures. Working together felt natural, and I found myself genuinely excited about our grand opening. The shop's first day exceeded our expectations. Students lined up to use the computers, local businesses came in for printing services, and several people inquired about the computer training classes we planned to offer. Carina was in her element, switching effortlessly between English and Tagalog as she helped customers and explained our services. I felt useful in a way I hadn't experienced since before my divorce. For the first month, everything went according to plan. Carina showed me daily receipts, discussed customer feedback, and shared ideas for expanding our services. The numbers looked good, not enough to make us rich, but steady income that would grow as word spread about our reliable service and modern equipment. I began to think I'd finally found the perfect retirement activity, meaningful work that helped the community while providing modest financial returns. But after 2 months, I started noticing small inconsistencies. The daily receipts Carina showed me didn't always match what I observed during my visits to the shop. When I asked about specific transactions, she had explanations, but they felt rehearsed. One afternoon, I arrived to find only 2 customers using computers, but the receipt from the previous day showed we'd served 15 people. "Business varies day to day," she explained when I brought up the discrepancy. "Yesterday was unusually busy because of university registration deadlines." I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. When I suggested we should meet with an accountant to make sure our bookkeeping was professional and tax compliant, Carina became defensive. "You don't trust me?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears. "After everything we've built together, you think I'm stealing from you?" The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. I was starting to have doubts, but I didn't want to admit it to myself or to her. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe the isolation of living in a foreign country was making me suspicious of normal business fluctuations. I dropped the subject, but the doubt remained. Things came to a head when Carina presented me with another opportunity. A second location had become available at an incredible price, she explained, showing me photos of a larger space in a more commercial area of the city. "We need to move fast," she said, her excitement palpable. "The landlord is giving us first option, but only if we can commit this week." The required investment was $25,000, significantly more than our original startup cost. But Carina's projections showed the new location could double our income within 6 months. The space was larger, in a better location, with parking that would attract more business customers. It seemed like a logical expansion for a successful business. "I don't know," I said, studying the financial projections. "25,000 is a lot of money. Maybe we should wait until our first location is more established." Carmina's expression changed instantly. "You don't believe in our partnership," she said, her voice flat with disappointment. "I thought you understood my vision, but you're thinking like a scared old man instead of a business partner." The words hit harder than she probably intended. I'd spent my entire adult life being cautious, playing it safe, and where had it gotten me? Divorced, lonely, starting over in a foreign country because I'd been too conservative to take the risks that might have made me truly successful. Maybe this was my chance to finally think bigger. "There are other foreign investors interested," Carina continued, her tone softer now. "I brought this opportunity to you first because I value our partnership, but I can't wait forever. Good opportunities don't come around often." The pressure felt real, and the fear of losing both the business and my friendship with Carina made the decision for me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to the investment. That night, I transferred $25,000 from my retirement account, telling myself I was being bold instead of foolish. But the second location never materialized. When I asked about it the following week, Carina gave vague explanations about permit delays and complications with the landlord. "These things take time in the Philippines," she said. "The bureaucracy is very slow, especially for foreign investors." I demanded to see documentation, the lease agreement, correspondence with the landlord, anything that would prove the opportunity was real. Carina claimed everything was being handled by her cousin who worked in the city permit office, but she couldn't produce any official papers. Meanwhile, I noticed that our original shop's hours had become erratic. When I visited unannounced, it was often closed during what should have been peak business hours. "Business has been slow," Carina explained when I confronted her about the irregular schedule. "The economy is difficult right now, and there's new competition from a larger internet cafe that opened near the university. We're adjusting our hours to focus on the most profitable periods." Nothing she said made sense. If business was slow, we should be extending our hours to capture every possible customer, not reducing them. When I suggested we needed to see real financial records and develop a proper marketing strategy to compete, Carina asked for another $10,000 to keep operations running and pay staff during this difficult period. That's when I finally said no. "I'm not investing another peso until I see detailed financial statements and documentation for all our previous expenses," I told her firmly. "This is supposed to be a partnership, but I feel like I'm being kept in the dark about basic business operations." The mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something in Carmina's eyes that chilled me. Not hurt or disappointment, but calculation. She was deciding how much she could get away with before I became a problem instead of an opportunity. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll prepare everything you want to see, but I'm hurt that you don't trust me after everything we've accomplished together." But she never prepared the financial statements. Instead, I made my own discoveries. When I went to the shop one afternoon and found it locked with no explanation, I spoke directly with the landlord. He told me rent hadn't been paid in 2 months, and he was planning to evict us if the situation didn't improve immediately. That's when I realized the scope of what had been done to me. I confronted Carina at her apartment, demanding answers and my money back. She broke down crying, admitting that the business had failed, but claiming she'd been too ashamed to tell me the truth. The second location money went to pay family debts and personal expenses, she sobbed. "I was going to pay you back when I found steady work. I promise." The tears felt genuine, but the explanation didn't add up. This hadn't been a business failure. It had been a systematic deception from the beginning. As I investigated further over the following days, talking to other expats and local business owners, the full picture emerged. The business license had never been properly filed. The equipment we'd supposedly purchased had been rented on short-term agreements. Most of the business expenses Carina had claimed were fabricated. Other foreigners in the community warned me that she'd attempted similar schemes before, always targeting older men who were lonely and eager to find purpose in their retirement. I calculated that I'd lost nearly $50,000 more than a quarter of my retirement savings. When I threatened legal action, Carina disappeared, leaving behind only a note claiming she'd never meant to hurt me and that I would never understand what it's like to be poor. Sitting alone in my apartment, facing the reality of my situation, I understood that my retirement dreams were over. At 63, with my savings severely depleted, I couldn't afford to stay in the Philippines long term. But returning to Australia meant starting over with almost nothing, competing for jobs with people half my age in a country where the cost of living would consume what little money I had left. I contacted a lawyer about recovering my money, but learned that pursuing legal action would cost more than I might recover, with no guarantee of success. The lawyer was sympathetic but realistic. Foreign investment fraud cases are difficult to prosecute here, he explained. The money is probably already spent or moved beyond recovery. You could spend years and thousands more dollars chasing something that may not exist anymore. The hardest part wasn't the money, it was accepting how easily I'd been manipulated. My loneliness and desire for purpose had made me an easy target. I'd ignored obvious warning signs because I wanted to believe that someone young and intelligent genuinely valued my partnership. The shame of being so thoroughly deceived felt worse than the financial loss. I made the difficult decision to return to Australia. Selling my few possessions in the Philippines gave me enough money for a plane ticket and a small security deposit on a studio apartment back in Nowra. The town looked the same, but I felt like a different person walking through streets where I'd once felt confident and successful. Now I was just another old man who'd made bad decisions and run out of second chances. The job at the hardware store was humbling work for someone who'd once managed his own business, but it gave me structure and human interaction. My co-workers were kind enough not to ask too many questions about why a 63-year-old man was starting over in retail. The pay was minimal, but combined with a small government pension, it was enough to cover basic expenses in my tiny apartment. 6 months later, I'd found a rhythm in my new life. The work wasn't stimulating, but it was honest, and I'd learned to appreciate the simplicity of problems that could be solved with the right tool or piece of advice. I joined a support group for people who'd been victims of financial fraud, where I shared my story and helped others avoid similar mistakes. The hardest part, I told the group one evening, isn't losing the money, it's losing faith in your own judgment. When you've been fooled that completely, you question every decision you make afterward. An older woman named Margaret nodded knowingly. "But you have to forgive yourself," she said. "Being trusting isn't a character flaw. It's what makes us human. The people who take advantage of that trust, they're the ones with the problem, not us." She was right. But forgiveness was a process, not a decision. Some days I felt philosophical about the experience, seeing it as an expensive education in human nature. Other days I felt bitter and stupid, wondering how I could have been so blind to what was happening. I still dream about traveling again someday, but now I understand the difference between investing in opportunities and investing in people who see me as one. Retirement isn't about escaping life's challenges, it's about facing them with the wisdom that experience brings, even when that experience comes at a painful cost. The young man who bagged groceries at the store asked me once why I seemed so calm about everything, given what he'd heard about my situation. At my age, I told him, you learn that dignity isn't about what happens to you. It's about how you handle what happens to you. I may be starting over at 63, but I'm starting over wiser. And sometimes, when you've lost almost everything, wisdom is the only wealth that really matters.